What happened when ancient humans got old? Picture it in your head. A brutal world. No medicine. No safety. Who would assume the elderly simply did not survive? That the old and weak were left behind? Or worse? Here is the uncomfortable twist. That assumption might be one of the biggest misunderstandings about prehistoric life. And the real story is something almost nobody teaches you. Let us start with the obvious assumption. Surely ancient humans did not live long enough to grow old, right? Wrong. Dead wrong. While average life expectancy in prehistoric times was lower, mainly due to high infant mortality and dangerous childbirth, that statistic hides something crucial. If an ancient human survived childhood, their chances of living into their 60s, 70s, even 80s, were far higher than most people assume. So old age was not rare. It was real. It happened constantly. Now here is where this gets genuinely strange. In 957, archaeologists excavating a place called Shanidar Cave in northern Iraq found something that should not have been possible: a Neanderthal skeleton, roughly 40 to 50 years old, which, for a Neanderthal, was extremely elderly. But that was not the shocking part. This individual was blind in one eye. His right arm had been amputated or had withered away decades before death. His hearing was likely impaired. He had severe arthritis throughout his body. Pause for a second, really think about that. A one-armed, partially blind, severely disabled Neanderthal somehow survived for years, maybe decades, in an Ice Age environment filled with predators, harsh winters, and constant physical danger. How is that even possible? He could not hunt. He could not effectively defend himself. By every brutal survival of the fittest assumption people make about prehistoric life, he should have died young, abandoned, or simply unable to keep up. He did not. Researchers studying his remains concluded the only explanation was deliberate, sustained care from his group. Someone fed him and he could not hunt. Someone helped him move when his body failed. 4 years. This was not an isolated case either. Archaeologists have found similar evidence across multiple ancient sites. Skeletons showing healed fractures that would have made independent survival impossible, missing teeth that meant food had to be specially prepared, individuals who lived for extended periods with disabilities that should have been fatal almost immediately. In one site in Vietnam, archaeologists found the skeleton of a young man who had been completely paralyzed from the waist down for at least a decade before he died, likely from a degenerative disease in his spine. He had no use of his legs, and very limited use of his arms. And yet, his bones showed no signs of the bed sores or muscle atrophy you would expect from someone simply left to die. Someone repositioned him regularly. Someone kept him clean, fed, and engaged with daily life for over 10 years in a society with no concept of modern medicine at all. Think about the sheer logistics of that. 10 years of consistent, daily care for someone who could offer nothing physical in return. That is not survival of the fittest. That is something closer to an early form of organized compassion. So here is a real question worth sitting with. If ancient life was truly as ruthless as we imagine, why would entire groups dedicate years of resources to someone who could not contribute physically anymore? The answer might be one of the most important discoveries in anthropology, and it has a name. Scientists call it the grandmother hypothesis. Here is the theory. Unlike most mammals, human females stop being able to reproduce decades before they die through menopause. In almost every other species, females remain fertile until close to death. So why would evolution allow human women to live 30, 40, even 50 years past their reproductive years? That should be an evolutionary dead end. A complete waste of resources, biologically speaking. Unless those extra years were not wasted at all. Researchers studying hunter-gatherer societies found something remarkable. Grandmothers were not sitting on the sidelines. They were actively gathering food, often more efficiently than younger women distracted by nursing infants. They were teaching survival skills. They were caring for grandchildren, freeing up mothers to have more children sooner, spaced closer together. In other words, older women were not a burden draining the group's resources. They were, statistically, one of the most valuable members of the entire community. Studies comparing communities with active grandmothers to those without found a measurable difference. Children with involved grandmothers had significantly higher survival rates. More children survived to adulthood. More knowledge got passed down. More of the group's accumulated wisdom did not simply vanish every generation. This single insight may explain why humans, almost uniquely among mammals, evolved such unusually long post-reproductive lifespans in the first place. Old age was not a flaw evolution forgot to fix. It was the plan all along. But it was not just grandmothers. Elderly men served a different, equally critical role. Think about what knowledge actually meant for survival in a world with no written language. Where was the safest water source during a drought that happened once every 20 years? Which plants looked similar but one was deadly poison? What warning signs preceded a flash flood, or a volcanic eruption, or a multi-year famine? This kind of knowledge was not something you could figure out twice in one lifetime. You needed someone who remembered the last time it happened. Anthropologists studying surviving hunter-gatherer cultures have documented elders recalling specific environmental events from 50, 60, even 70 years earlier, information that directly saved their group's lives during a similar crisis decades later. A 25-year-old hunter had never seen a drought that severe. A 70-year-old elder had survived 3 of them. In a world without books, without internet, without any external memory storage at all, the elderly quite literally were the group's memory. Losing an elder did not just mean losing a person. It meant losing decades of irreplaceable survival data, permanently, with no backup. There is a term anthropologists sometimes use for this: ecological memory. It is the idea that a group's long-term survival depends on someone remembering rare events that do not happen often enough for younger members to have personally witnessed them. Researchers studying the Martu people, an Aboriginal Australian group with deep traditional ecological knowledge, found that elders could accurately describe water source locations and behaviors that had not been needed in over 40 years, information passed down specifically for the rare, multi-decade drought cycles that periodically threatened the entire region. When that exact kind of drought returned, the knowledge was still there, waiting, held by people in their 60s and 70s, who had heard it from elders before them. Without that single chain of memory, an entire community could have walked straight into a crisis with zero warning. This completely flips the modern stereotype of prehistoric life on its head, does not it? We picture ancient humans abandoning the old and weak. The actual evidence increasingly shows something closer to the opposite. Groups that protected and supported their elderly consistently outcompeted groups that did not, because knowledge and childcare support directly translated into more surviving children. Natural selection was not punishing compassion here. It was rewarding it. Here is a question worth pausing on for a moment. If you had to guess, what do you think happened to elderly members of a group during absolute worst times, famines, brutal winters, periods when food was desperately scarce for everyone? You would expect the old to be sacrificed first. Logically, that seems like the efficient choice. But anthropological records from documented hunter-gatherer cultures tell a strikingly different story in many cases. During severe scarcity, elders often voluntarily reduced their own food intake, not because they were forced to, but specifically to protect children and pregnant women in the group. This was not universal, and harsh trade-offs absolutely did happen in real crises. But the pattern of elder self-sacrifice, recorded across multiple unrelated cultures on different continents, suggests something deliberate. A recognition, even in genuine desperation, of which lives held the most long-term value for the group's survival. That is not the brutal, every man for himself world most people imagine. There is one more layer to this that rarely gets mentioned, and it might be the most quietly profound part of the entire story. Caring for a disabled or elderly group member for years, with no expectation of immediate physical return, required something psychologically significant. Genuine social bonds, real empathy, and group identity strong enough to prioritize a vulnerable member's survival over short-term efficiency. In other words, the Shanidar man was not just kept alive by accident. He may have been proof that deep emotional connection, the kind we associate with modern relationships and family, existed in our ancestors tens of thousands of years before recorded history began. So what actually happened when ancient humans got old? They were not abandoned. In countless documented cases, they were protected, valued, and depended upon, not despite their age, but specifically because of it. The wisdom, the childcare, the irreplaceable memory of disasters survived decades earlier. Old age was not the end of someone's usefulness to the group. For many ancient humans, it may have been the beginning of their most important role. So here is something to think about. Every piece of advice an elder in your life has ever given you, every story about back in my day, might be an echo of the exact same survival mechanism that kept humans alive for hundreds of thousands of years. Did you know any of this before today? Drop a comment and tell me which fact surprised you the most. I read every single one, and if you want more videos that take strange, overlooked questions about human history and actually explain the real science behind them, make sure you are subscribed, because next time, we are answering a question even stranger than this one. I will see you in the next video.